It is my immense pleasure to welcome back Konstantin to the channel. He's one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what is happening inside Russia, and of course, the Russian mindset that has led to Putin's full-scale war. Konstantin is an extremely well-known YouTuber whose channel Inside Russia comments insightfully on Russia's descent into authoritarianism. And I'm sure many of you will know this is not our first conversation. We've had numerous conversations before. So if you enjoy this, if you get value from this more particularly, then please do go and check out our previous conversations and definitely check you're subscribed to the channel. There's all sorts of algorithmic weirdness going on. I wouldn't want you to miss out on the amazing guests who give up their time to appear on the channel. And also, as I do now in each of the episodes, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports me, who supports Konstantin, who uses things like Buy Me a Coffee and so on to help us continue the work that we are doing. It is, as Konstantin will agree, a full-time job. Thank you also to everyone who has been supporting the documentary film that we're trying to fundraise. We'll be putting regular updates on that onto the channel. The good news is we have now pretty much reached the initial target, so we can at least kick off the filming process this year, which is fantastic news. But I will share more details of that with the audience as soon as we have them. And I'm delighted that you can welcome us back for the second part of a discussion. This one is on, I think, quite a delicate topic, and that is the effectiveness or perhaps ineffectiveness of the attempts to oppose Putin's regime. And I think this is can be quite a divisive topic. It's quite an emotive topic as well, of course, because whatever people think of Alexei Navalny's policies, there is no doubt at all that he was an extraordinary, effective communicator, and indeed showed a considerable amount of bravery after being poisoned, threatened, etc., arrested numerous times, one presumes probably beaten as well, and yet continuously placed himself in danger. So I think it's possible to set aside the man and the policies and to see in him someone who showed, I would say, leadership qualities. I know not everyone, certainly on the Ukrainian side, is necessarily going to feel comfortable with that, but he certainly showed leadership qualities, and he was a unique individual in the Russian sphere. It seems to me, however, that he has left a huge gaping hole and no one quite comes up to his stature or even effectiveness as a communicator. Konstantin, we haven't really talked about this before, so I'm really keen to hear what you think about that, what I've just outlined there, but also the fundamental problems with, the opposition, so-called diverse opposition to Putin's regime.
Jonathan, we haven't touched the topic of Russian opposition before. I'm glad we're talking about it now. Alexei Navalny, in my mind, is a hero. He's a person who gave his life for Russia, for his vision of Russia. He was a politician. He had a political program. He was very popular in Russia. My daughter, being a high school student, along with her classmates, went to a meeting to support Navalny. And a lot of high school students, younger people came, and after that, they made a law prosecuting parents if their kids go to political protests, because, they couldn't touch minors. Say, hey, we'll touch their parents instead. So I went to a few meetings myself in Moscow. I documented it. It's on YouTube. It's in my Facebook. I absolutely enjoy the work that Alexei and his team FBK did in the past. They did a lot of investigations. Basically, they were shedding the light on the lives of Russian officials, starting with Vladimir Putin and ending, just governors. And so they were telling Russian people the truth about who rules them. And not just telling the truth, but doing investigations. They did brilliant investigations. They found, they basically how do I say that? They did brilliant work presenting the truth to Russian people and backing it up with the facts. Um, this is what I think of Alexei personally and his legacy.
And one of the challenges, isn't it, is that those who come after, there are members of the Navalny's Fabaka team who are a little less known than he is, but there are still some recognizable faces there. But that's only perhaps if you're immersed in the sort of diaspora opposition who watches a lot of their materials, and they have morphed into being less political activists. I would say more into being sort of media commentators. They've really tipped a lot of their efforts into YouTube videos and so on, rather than these ground up research that had such an impact. But that's on the outside. What kind of recognition do those figures who remain in the opposition, what kind of recognition do they have within Russia itself? Or is that very difficult to gauge?
Just to make it clear, we're talking about FBK, the organization that Alexei Navalny
I
created,
think there'd
right?
be for Bakar, but also people I would say like Maxim Katz and others. There are a number of figures within Fabakar, and there are those that sort of broadly align themselves there. So we're not talking about Kasparov or Khartokovsky there. I think they're a separate kind of ecosystem. But those who are very much aligned on the Fabakar type model and tend not to criticize them.
Let me I got it. Let me talk about FBK first. Uh, FBK doesn't have a spine any longer. Its spine was Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was the politician. He had a plan. He had a vision for Russia. He envisioned future, and then he presented that future, and he sold it to many Russian people. They loved it, and they followed him. After he was murdered, what's left of his organization, these people, they're not politicians. They still do investigations. They have slowed down a great deal in their investigations, and they are a part of huge scandals, a series of huge scandals right now. And it seems like they have lost the direction. I'm glad that they exist because, any kind of opposition is better than no opposition at all. But I have lost a great deal of respect to FBK. And there are other members of opposition. The problem, this is my opinion, solely my opinion. The problem with Russian opposition is that it's not united. There are different groups, like you said, there are different ecosystems. Khodorkovsky, Kasparov,
Yeah.
Katz, some others.
And Ponomarov, who's
They're not
taken a very
united.
different kind of route to opposition as well. We'll come to that one in a minute.
Yes, yes, and they're not united. They don't have one vision for Russia. Every time they try to unite, there have been attempts made. Someone comes up and doesn't go along, and all these models are broken. Um, Again, I'm glad that they exist. I'm glad that they do what they do because it's better than nothing. It's much better than not having opposition at all. But Russian opposition is very ineffective. Uh, they have started, these ecosystems have started fighting with each other. There have been conflicts, accusations, scandals, and investigations against each other started. Okay. They're losing focus. They need to focus on how to change Russia, how to bring it into democracy, into fairness. Instead, they're fight with each other.
And it's one of the fears, of course, is that I mean, Russian disinformation is very effective around the world at getting people to argue with each other. And I won't say they invented Brexit, but certainly they were able to pour petrol on the flames. They didn't invent MAGA and a lot of the social issues which have caused so many people to align themselves with Trump and vote for him. The social issues are real, Russian disinformation is great at pouring petrol on the flames and getting people to argue with each other. It's a bit like Harry Potter, the Voldemort, getting everyone to sort of scream at each other means you're divided. The same applies, if not more, to Russian opposition. I mean, it must be a key target of the intelligence services to plant stories, plant agents, and get the opposition to sort of fight each other. That must be a core part of their strategy, even though it's very difficult to prove. So a lot of the conflicts you talked about, some of them may be sort of organic and just emerge from the kind of personalities we're dealing with them. Some of them may well be sort of stories and campaigns planted to try and keep the opposition divided.
I can't argue with you here. I think you're absolutely right. There is a great deal of work being done to break Russian opposition apart, to weaken it, to discredit it, to disgrace it. And I think that Russian authorities, the KGB and other agencies, are doing very hard work on achieving their goal. But I think that if, first of all, there aren't too many oppositioners in Russia. I can count them by fingers of both hands, the key people, the key personalities. And I think it's fairly easy to fight disinformation campaign. For example, Jonathan, say 10 people, okay? If someone would really want to unite, someone would really want to have, someone had the vision of Russia like Navalny did. What I think Navalny would just bring everyone together, go and meet everyone, and just had a conversation. Let's say me and you, okay? If we have a big goal, common goal, and then we start having misunderstandings about what we say about each other or say about other things, what I would do is I would book a ticket, I would fly to London, I would sit at the table, I would buy you an English breakfast tea, and I would talk to you.
How about a whole
And we
English
would work
breakfast?
out all
The tea and the full breakfast.
yeah. And we would work out all our misunderstandings, okay? And there would be no conflict between us. And under just 10 people to talk to in the Russian opposition, what prevents them from meeting each other? Egos? Personal goals, perhaps? Well, they got to put that aside. They got to come together, sit at one table, and agree and go along with each other. And that's not being done. Okay. And that's no matter how hard Russian authorities and special agencies work, they can't break down Russian opposition if those leaders would really want to get together and work hard on one common goal. I think that the biggest problem is they have personal goals taking over one big goal. I always say that no one can force me to drink and become alcoholic. Okay, they can tempt me into this. That's my decision whether to drink or not to drink. Same thing with the special operations. They definitely can try to disgrace, but if the opposition leaders come together and instead of 5 fingers, they'll force a fist, that would become a great force. Unfortunately, it's not the case.
And of course, there are a number of things. There are two things that work in the disfavor, I think, of opposition. One is that it's very easy to sow distrust. And I had this experience running the event in Lviv last year. In the week before the event, one presumes it was Russian agents and assets outside the country started trying to put people off from visiting the event and from being involved in the event. So 2 days before the event itself, we'd lost 1/3 of the speakers who said they could turn up to speak at the event. Now, some of them might genuinely have had other things going on, and these things happen, but to lose a third of your booked speakers for probably the largest conference of its type that's happened in Ukraine, That's not a coincidence. And we later found out that, people had been sent emails, spurious evidence to say, look, Jonathan, right, he's a nice guy, but he's quite naive because he's invited this person and this person and this person, and that person is under investigation by the SBU. This person's done that, and it would damage your reputation. In fact, will ensure your reputation is damaged if you appear on a stage. I mean, in that circumstance, it's quite good that two-thirds of the guests sort of ignored that and still turned up. But we frantically had to find alternative guests, and we did it, and that's great. But you can see how it's easy to erode trust. The other thing, of course, is that Navalny's legacy has become a very lucrative financially. There are many people who depend on their income from being able to spin the legacy out through books, through the media channels, and keeping that alive. And of course, once money's involved, I think people are far more likely to argue with each other.
As of your conference, people got to have logic and common sense. My approach is, if I receive any kind of information, what you just described, email, suggestion, I would go to you if you organize the conference, and I would confront you, and I would ask you questions, and I would get answers, and I'd make my decision, okay, based on that. If people dropped out based on their decisions from emails or classic smear campaign, because what you described is very classic, has been used by the KGB for what, decades now, okay? A smear campaign and this whole techniques. Perhaps they shouldn't have been the speakers in the first place, I'm glad that it worked out for you and two-thirds stayed. I think that, you had a fantastic, that happened, right? The event happened, took place
The event
already.
happened, and we actually filled. We last minute we got sort of about 6 new speakers just by contacting our network and reaching out. So in the end, we had the same amount that we would have had before. But you can imagine the last minute kind of panic and phone calls and pulling in favors.
Well, I'm glad it worked out, and you definitely defeated the KGB. As for the second part, yes, it has become lucrative. Everything with Navalny name on it has become gold. And unfortunately, when people start earning money, they start, fighting. They start conflicting, and this is sad. That's all I have to say. We're seeing it left and right now.
And this is a topic which I think is one that certainly Ukrainians will raise, and that is, how do you be in opposition? How do you be in opposition to Putin? And that it creates real dilemmas. So I'll give some examples. I mean, I would put you forward as a great example of how to oppose, and that is through being truthful, being authentic, discussing facts, being open-minded, challenging, your own preconceptions. It's an extraordinary sort of, listening to you, challenge yourself and all the information that's sort of coming in, as well as everything you may have learned, before all of this happened. So I'd say you're a great example for model opposition. Another model would be Michael Naki. He is absolutely clear. He says that the only transformation possible in Russia will result from a defeat. And the only way for that to happen is for Ukraine to defeat Putin. And it's absolutely simple in his mind. He discourages people from joining the military to become killers. And he actually fundraises for Ukrainian units on his program. He's one of the few opposition that actually does that and seeks to build that sort of trust with Ukrainian units actually sort of serving. And he's morally says it's simple. He doesn't want to see Russians die, but if they're on the territory of Ukraine, they shouldn't be there. And they should do everything in their power to avoid being sent there. I think that's very, very clear. Another model, I think, for opposition is Alexei Zimin, a well-known chef and media personality who unfortunately seems to have died under I don't know whether it's suspicious circumstances, but because he died in Serbia, it's quite possible to think that that would be covered up. But again, very, very vocal oppositionist, and he was donating 10% of his restaurant business turnover to the Red Cross and the Ukrainian diaspora. So for me, those are absolute models of moral clarity there. Yulia Navalnaya has something which could be described as a problem. She cannot bring herself to talk about Ukrainian victory. She cannot bring herself to even say that it is right for Ukrainians to defend themselves and receive Western weapons. There's a problem here, isn't there, with the choice of words and the choice of position, and I would say the moral or immoral stance of perhaps not being able to align yourself with a Ukrainian victory.
There's a bigger problem with Yulia Navalnaya, I think. What you've said is right, and the choice of words and the stand and so forth, but Alexei Navalny was a politician. Yulia Navalnaya is not. She is absolutely a great lady. A, she was a great wife to Alexei. She was a great friend and supporter. She was with him through hardest times. Okay, and my wife is with me. I know how difficult it can be to spouses, and I have utmost respect for Yulia Navalnaya, what she's done. She's absolutely fantastic person, but she's not a politician. She was not the oppositioner Alexei, her husband, was. She never spoke. She never was in the public eye. We didn't even know that she was, well, a lot of people didn't know that Yulia Navalnaya was behind Alexei Navalny, which is absolutely right, because she was helping him as a wife should. And now she's kind of trying to step into his shoes, and she's more of a media person. She goes out and speaks at conferences and plays the role of the wife of Alexei Navalny, that's who she is. But she's not a politician. She doesn't have a vision for Russia's future like Alexei did. He was unique. He was none like him exist. Okay. And I don't really understand her role in all this media frenzy right now. She's not positioning herself as the wife of Navalny. But it's not clear what her position is. She's not leading the opposition. She's not making attempts, and like you said, she's not very clear on her stand.
That clarity as well, isn't it? Is they're still focusing, or Publica is still focusing on corruption as opposed to systemic change. I think at this point, when so much has happened, so much has changed, that may be a strategic problem. You do, however, have some oppositionists such as Khodorkovsky and Kasparov, and they are giving far more detailed and systemic, I would say, critiques of the Russian system. And they're providing far more clarity in not only what kind of society they want to see, but they're starting to talk about the steps to get there. How do you reform the judiciary? How do you change the vast, ecosystem siloviki that sort of perpetuate the authoritarian system? How do you tackle propagandistic media? I don't say they have the solutions to all of this, but they are discussing these sort of issues. The challenge at the back of my mind is that do any of them have a chance of actually getting their hands on the reins of power? Because if you look at a lot of Western media coverage, there's almost an inbuilt assumption that liberals, if we want to put a label on it, have a chance of taking over the Kremlin at some point after the fall of Putin. But I think for those observing what's been going on, that still seems to be an unlikely scenario.
You're right about FBK. They keep on doing investigations, but they're trying to expose corruption, and that is not the plan for the future of Russia. Alexei Navalny, again, he was a politician. He had a plan, he had a vision. He was the leader. People were following him because they liked his vision. Okay, and then he provided the plan. And the plan was very simple yet effective. Um, he was trying to make his supporters be very politically active and take political offices, which was a great strategy, and that had a huge fight from a huge opposition from Russian state. Um, FBK, what's left of the organization after Navalny was murdered, there are not stepping into his shoes, so to speak. If the director of FBK would stand up and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to continue doing what Alexei Navalny was doing. And, I have this Alexei's vision, and this is the plan how we're going to realize that vision, so forth. No, they're not doing it. They're earning lots of money. Okay. They've been just caught red-handed for doing not very ethical activity. There's been a huge investigation against them by Maxim Katz. Well, I'm pretty sure you know that. And they were proved to to have done things that they shouldn't have, in my opinion. And yes, there are other opposition leaders, Khodorkovsky, Kasparov. They are doing things, and they have their own visions. They have their own plans. I'm glad that that is happening. At the same time, I don't think that if Putin's regime falls by natural causes, let's say Putin is an old man, he dies of natural causes, or perhaps not natural causes. I don't think that the power in the Kremlin will be taken by the liberals. First of all, who are the liberals in Russia right now? It's kind of the same thing as were there any liberals and oppositioners to the Soviet state at the Joseph Stalin's times? No, they weren't, and there aren't any liberals left right now. I think that the possible scenario, what happens after Putin is out of the door, is that Siloviki are going to have a huge fight, and one person will win, one agency will win, and will have help of other agencies, and some Siloviki will be out of the door and eliminated. Agencies perhaps disbanded or shaken up, or but this is a possible scenario if Putin is out of the door. And Michael Naki's scenario is different. I think that he's right in many ways. Russia needs to fall low in order to get high again. The lowest it can. It needs to fall into ashes to be reborn as Phoenix. That's what I think.
And indeed, Russian history does indeed show that the greatest periods of reform have followed military defeats in the past. There is a significant pattern. The trouble is the militarization of society almost inevitably. Once things get fixed, once industries start flourishing, once the central government has money again, then that process of remilitarization seems to be another recurrent pattern. Well, Konstantin, we'll come back to this over and over, I think, because there are multiple things to unpick.
One thing, can I add something? You saying that in the history of Russia, biggest defeats, military defeats, led to development of the developments of the
Periods of
country.
reform and reflection. There are several instances, yeah.
In my eyes, Russia has lost already. I mean, 2.5 years it's been fighting Ukraine. It advanced very quickly all the way to Kiev. And then the Ukrainians kicked Russian armed forces' butts and threw them away from Kiev. They withdrew to first Kharkov, and then they flew from Kharkov. They fled from Kharkov back into Russia, and then Kharkov is being controlled by, well, it was being controlled by the Ukrainians until recently. There are parts that Russia took back. Okay, it advanced and it took Kherson very quickly. and then it was kicked out of Kherson, and it cannot retake it. I don't think they even trying to retake Kherson.
No,
Okay.
no, I think that's very unlikely.
They have taken a few towns in Ukraine, but you can hardly call it captured and liberated because the towns don't exist anymore. They've razed the towns. And they haven't gone far into Ukraine in 2.5 years. And that is what they used to call army number two in the world. Okay, it turns out to be number 222%, perhaps. How many Russian men died? Hundreds of thousands. How many are crippled, disabled? Hundreds of thousands. How many widows and orphans now in Russia? The economy is absolutely destroyed. Yes, the military industrial complex have been beefed up, but you know what? That's not sustainable economy. You cannot live off your military industrial complex. It's the consumer of funds. It's not the creator of wealth. The essence of any society, freedom of citizens, have been taken away by the government. Russia is destroyed. As we are speaking right now, I think it's been defeated. Um, that's just it's defeated more and more as days go by. This is just my opinion. I wanted to make this remark.
No, I think that's very valid. I mean, if you look at the statistics, it's Russia is sustaining a Afghan war scale loss on a near monthly basis. And of course, history, I think, as you say, will judge that as a calamitous defeat. As long as the government are paying people to tell a different story through propagandistic channels, that alternative message will exist, but I think it will deflate like a burst balloon once the money runs out and people will then see the reality you've described for what it actually is.
Agreed.
Konstantin, this has been one of the, if not the most fascinating, I think, conversation that we've had to date. It's contained the most amount of details. If people watch the two parts, I think they'll get the full sort of depth and breadth of the ideas and insights that you've shared with us. I'm immensely grateful. I know the audience will be as well. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing. It's immensely important. Konstantin, thank you for coming back on.
Jonathan, thank you very much. You're a fantastic interviewer. I think every interview with you is like a great conversation. It's always the most fascinating, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Welcome to the mental gym. I think we've had a big workout today, and I now need a cup of tea.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Looking forward to the next conversation.